The question nobody asks. There's a question that haunts every serious conversation about the greatest running backs who ever lived, and it goes like this. What would have happened if Barry Sanders had played for a real football team? Not what he did, what he could have done. Because what he did in 10 seasons on a franchise that made the playoffs just 4 times, surrounded by mediocrity that would have broken lesser men, was already enough to make football people lose their words entirely. Defensive coordinators built entire game plans around stopping one player. Coaches watched his film and ran out of language. The Minnesota Vikings defensive line coach once told reporters the only way to simulate Barry Sanders in practice was to have his linemen chase chickens around the field. Chickens, because no human being moved the way Barry Sanders moved. Barry Sanders played 10 seasons of NFL football. He retired 1,457 yards short of the all-time rushing record. He never won a Super Bowl. He never had a quarterback worth the name. And yet, every serious analyst who watched him play says the same thing. He was the most elusive, most gifted runner who ever set foot on a football field. This is the story of Barry Sanders, and it is unlike any other story in NFL history. Because most sports tragedies are about what athletes did to themselves. This one is about what a franchise did to its greatest player, and how history blamed him for it. Act 1. The kid nobody wanted. Barry Sanders grew up in Wichita, Kansas, the 7th of 11 children. His father was a carpenter and roofer. His mother was a nurse. The household ran on one philosophy. You work for everything, and you never complain about the work. From a young age, Barry and his brothers helped their father on roofing jobs. No shortcuts, no entitlement, just the work. It is almost too perfect in retrospect. The man who would spend a decade carrying the entire weight of a broken franchise learned early what it felt like to carry weight that was never his responsibility. In high school, Sanders wasn't even the starting running back. Standing 5'8", he was considered too small, too easy to overlook. His own coach saw a backup. His father saw something different, believed Barry had the ability to play in the NFL, but nobody else shared that belief. Major college programs saw nothing worth a scholarship. He received 4 offers. 4. The kid who would one day be called the greatest running back who ever lived was nearly talked out of football entirely by the people paid to recognize talent for a living. He chose Oklahoma State. A Heisman candidate named Thurman Thomas was already in the backfield, so Barry waited again, always being told the moment wasn't his yet, always somewhere behind someone else. When Thomas left for the NFL, Barry finally stopped waiting. In 1988, in 11 games, he ran for 2,628 yards and 37 touchdowns, setting college football season records for rushing yards, all-purpose yards, points scored, and rushing touchdowns. He averaged over 200 rushing yards per game for an entire season. Those numbers do not belong in a college record book. They belong in a fever dream. He won the Heisman Trophy and declared for the NFL Draft. For the first time in his life, nobody was counting him out. Act 2. The franchise that failed him. The Detroit Lions selected Barry Sanders 3rd overall in 1989. They signed him to a 5-year deal worth $9.5 million and handed him the keys to a franchise that had missed the playoffs in 7 consecutive seasons. Barry delivered immediately. 1,470 yards, 14 touchdowns, franchise records. He finished just 11 yards short of leading the entire league in rushing as a rookie. First team All-Pro, Pro Bowl. The Lions had found their cornerstone, and then they did almost nothing to build around it. This is the detail that every Barry Sanders biography glosses over, and that every honest football conversation must confront directly. The Detroit Lions had chances, real, documented, undeniable chances to build a winner around their greatest player. Joe Montana, 4 Super Bowl rings, arguably the most accomplished quarterback in NFL history, wanted to come to Detroit late in his career. The Lions' general manager said no, said Montana was too old. Montana then signed with the Kansas City Chiefs and led them to the AFC Championship game. Bill Parcells, who had won 2 Super Bowls with the New York Giants, offered his services as Detroit's head coach. The Lions passed. Denny Green, who would go on to lead the Minnesota Vikings to 8 playoff appearances in 9 years, was available. The Lions passed. Season after season, while Barry Sanders was doing things with a football that redefined what the position could look like, the organization around him was making decisions that defied every standard of serious franchise building. In 1991, Sanders carried Detroit to the playoffs for the first time since 1983, and their first playoff win since 1962. The city erupted. For one season, it looked like the Lions might finally be building something worthy of their extraordinary talent. They were not building anything. That was the peak. Barry would reach the playoffs 3 more times in his career. They won 0 more playoff games. The franchise that had been handed the most gifted runner of a generation used him the way a burning building uses a fire extinguisher, desperately, completely, without ever addressing the reason for the fire. Act 3. What greatness looked like. In 1994, Sanders rushed for 1,883 yards, the 4th most in NFL history at the time, behind an offensive line opposing defenses had already largely solved. He did it anyway. In 1997, he broke the 2,000-yard barrier, finishing with 2,053 yards and the league MVP award. He was 29 years old, playing the best football of his life, carrying a team to a 9-7 record, a team that had no business being 9-7 without him. He became the first player ever to rush for 1,000 yards in each of his first 10 seasons. He did it with fewer carries than anyone who came close to that record. He did it as the only offensive weapon opposing defenses needed to game plan against. He did it while the organization cycled through coaches, quarterbacks, and front office personnel with the consistency of a revolving door. Every year, Barry Sanders showed up. Every year, Detroit gave him less reason to. After the MVP season, Detroit rewarded him with a 6-year, $34.56 million deal, making him the highest-paid player in the entire league. What they did not do was use that moment to finally build a roster worthy of the man they were paying more than anyone else. The 1998 season, Barry's last, Detroit went 5-11. The season after paying the greatest player in franchise history more than any player in the NFL had ever been paid, the finish finished with 5 wins. Act 4. The facts. On July 28, 1999, the day before Detroit training camp began, the franchise received a fax. No phone call, no press conference, no warning. Just a fax sent through a friend at a local newspaper, containing 11 words that stopped the NFL cold. My desire to exit the game is greater than my desire to remain in it. He was 30 years old, healthy, 1,457 yards short of the all-time rushing record, a number that he would almost certainly have passed in one more season. The highest paid player in football, and he was done. The reaction was instant fury. How dare he? Doesn't he owe the fans more? The narrative formed within hours and hardened into fact within days. Barry Sanders quit. Barry Sanders gave up. Barry Sanders let everyone down. The Lions then demanded he return $5.5 million of his signing bonus. An arbitrator ruled he repay $1.833 million. The greatest player in franchise history, a man who had carried Detroit on his back, was being sued by the team he had carried on his back. That narrative was wrong, and everyone who built it knew it was wrong. They just found it easier to blame the player than ask the harder question. After 10 years of watching his franchise reject Joe Montana, pass on Bill Parcells, go 5-11 the season after he won MVP, was Barry Sanders wrong to walk away? Act 5. What remain? 10 seasons, 15,269 rushing yards, a 5.0 yards per carry average sustained across an entire career, a number that, if you understand football, should be impossible. 10 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, 4 rushing titles, 1 MVP, 6 first-team All-Pro selections, a Hall of Fame induction in 2004 as one of the youngest inductees in the history of the game.
Emmitt Smith eventually broke Walter Payton's all-time rushing record. Smith needed 16 seasons and 88 more games than Sanders to get there. He needed 6 more years of football to surpass a number Barry would have broken in 1 more season. The all-time record exists the way it does because Barry Sanders stopped playing. Every serious football person knows it. The record has had an asterisk in the minds of analysts and fans ever since. Quiet, unspoken, impossible to argue away. Jerry Rice, the greatest receiver in NFL history, a man who competed against the best players of multiple generations, was asked who the most gifted player he ever shared a field with was. He didn't pause. He didn't hedge. Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders did not retire because he lost his love for football. He retired because he had spent 10 years watching a franchise he had carried since he was 20 years old make decision after decision that proved they were not serious about winning. He had watched Montana get turned away at the door. He had watched Parcells and Green get passed over for lesser men. He had gone 5-11 in the season immediately after winning MVP. And at 30 years old, still elite, still healthy, he finally said out loud what the evidence had been saying for a decade. 1,457 yards. That is the number. One more season. That was all it would have taken to make Barry Sanders the all-time leading rusher in NFL history. But Barry had already given Detroit 10 years of the impossible. And Detroit had given him 10 years of losing seasons, rejected legends, and a front office that looked at Joe Montana and said no. History calls it his retirement. History calls it his choice. History blamed the player for walking away. History got it wrong. Barry Sanders didn't quit. Detroit quit on him. Imagine what 1,457 more yards would have looked like.